Hi everybody, this is Brendan here at Common Motor. That's common-motor.com on the internets. Today we're going to be showing you two things. One, how to do a cam chain adjustment, and two, how to do a valve adjustment on the Honda CB350 series of bikes. This also applies to the CL350 and SL350. This is regular maintenance that has to be done every 1,500 miles, so it's important that you learn it. So stay tuned. So our bike's actually prepped to do the valve adjustment. Tank is off, points cover is off. On the other side of the engine I took off the tack cover. Spark plugs are out on both sides. Our caps, these guys that cover the valve adjusters, all four of those are taken off. And I also have the rotor cover off down here on the bottom of the engine. So we're going to adjust the valves, but before we do the valves we're actually going to do the cam chain adjustment because it's really easy. And it should be done, as I mentioned earlier, before the valve is done. So we're going to do them both in conjunction with each other. So I want to point out a couple of details to you about the things we're adjusting and how we're positioning the engine in order to make the adjustments. First thing I'm going to point out is up here we have it looks like a flathead screwdriver slot here and here with a nut on it. This and this are our adjusters, or valve adjusters, for the left-hand cylinder. This adjuster controls the left-hand intake, and this adjuster controls the left-hand exhaust. On the other side of the engine, we have the same exact thing for the right side. They look almost identical. So we'll be making our adjustments using these basically flathead screw slots here, which are actually a shaft that runs through the motor this way. Coming down, we have our rotor, and this is a really important piece of the engine here because it tells us a lot of different things about when to make adjustments with the engine. The first important thing I want to point out here is on this coil, which is kind of in this 11 o'clock position, there's a little tick mark. There's a little tiny notch in it. This is what we call the index mark. This is the equivalent of our 12 o'clock noon or 0 mark on the engine. And this is what we use to turn the engine in reference to. So that's our beginning and ending point of kind of everything is that mark. Along the rotor here, we have a couple of different marks that are stamped in there. Most notable, we have an LF mark, an LT mark, and 180 degrees away from it, I have an F mark and a T mark. The F marks indicate the fire, which is the spark plug firing, and the T marks indicate top dead center. And what top dead center means is that piston is all the way at the top of its travel before it starts to come back down in the engine. We're going to use the T marks to set the valves, but we also have to note what stroke we're on. Remember, this is a 4-stroke engine. We have compression, power, exhaust, intake. All of these adjustments are done on the compression stroke, meaning that piston is coming up and about to squeeze all the gas and air together and then be lit with the spark plug. There's a really easy way to tell, am I on the compression stroke of the engine? Because it's possible you could be on the exhaust stroke. I'm just going to take my wrench. On the rotor here we have an index mark that has, on our rotor here we have an arrow that indicates counterclockwise rotation. Make sure you rotate your engine that way. Now I'm going to take my finger and put it over the spark plug hole. I'm going to feel for pressure. I don't really feel anything there, so I'm probably 180 degrees or 360 degrees out of phase on the exhaust stroke. There we go. Now I'm starting to feel some pressure. See if you guys can hear that. I'm getting a tss. All right, that says I just was past the compression stroke. I'm going to back up the engine a little bit. Not too much, but so you guys can see it. All right. Rotate the engine over again. Keep going. All right, that should be our compression stroke again. Sure enough is. Now the engine wants to kind of, I call it cam over. I'm holding it in place here. And that mark, the LT mark, lined up with the index mark, is where we're going to set the engine to adjust the valves for the left side of the motor. Left side is from when you're sitting on the bike. The cam chain adjustment is done kind of halfway in between the valve adjustments. It's actually done 90 degrees past this LT mark. So we'll let the engine turn a little bit. And this engine's actually had it done before. It's right there. And we actually went ahead and made we stamped a little dot in it in the past to know that mark. It's not stamped in from the factory. But right now, we're about 90 degrees away. So here, 180, you draw a perpendicular line there. It's about 90 degrees. That's our spot to do the cam chain adjustment. We're going to do that right now because it's really quick. So our engine's in position here for the cam chain adjustment. Remember, if you don't have a mark here, which you probably don't, go ahead and make one here for next time because it's going to be handy. And we just did that with a punch, a center punch right there, so we know where it is. Again, we are 90 degrees past the LT mark off the compression stroke on the left cylinder. Here's our cam chain adjuster. It has this kind of Tin Man's nose looking shape to it. And we're going to use a 12mm wrench to break this nut loose on the bottom here. This is just a locking jam nut. Come in here, break that loose, back it off a hair. I'm going to come into the top here with a 10mm and back off this adjuster nut here. That's it. That's the adjustment. There's no whole lot to it. It's really about making sure the engine's in the right position. What's happening in this little gizmo here is there's a spring, and it looks kind of like a pinball machine plunger that pushes on a roller. Roller has its little wheel, and it tightens up the chain. So all we're doing is loosening that up, letting that plunger relax, the spring take up any slack, and then I'm just going to bring that screw back down until I feel it touch. Just snug, not overly tight. A lot of people want to go crazy with it. Feel it stop. I'm going to bring down that lock jam nut there. That's the 12mm. And hold it in place. That is the cam chain adjustment. If you don't do it though over a lot of miles, it can cause damage. So again, it's important to do your 1,500 miles. Great. Let's get set up to do the left-hand side of the engine valve adjustment. Alright, so cam chain's adjusted. Went ahead and rotated the motor around again. We are now back at our LT mark on the compression stroke, at our index mark here. And I took the wrench and I just kind of tied it to the engine here, just so it doesn't move because it wants to do this like cam over deal. Alright, up top. Here are our valve adjusters. 12mm nut on either side of those. So I'll just a lock nut. Break them loose. 1, 2. Back them out of here. Now we can actually do the adjustment. So the adjustment process is done by actually turning these shafts here. This is the process. Again, as we mentioned in the on the bench, here's our tick mark. We've got one facing kind of at 4 o'clock-ish over here, and one that's facing kind of 7 o'clock-ish over here. We have a hypothetical center line through the motor with a spark plug. We want to be facing away from the spark plug. That's our general orientation because these can be turned 180 degrees out of phase. So that's where we want to be. Now, let's actually make the adjustment. On the intake side, our value is 2,007 inch. On the exhaust side, it's 4,007 inch. I like to use a method called the overshoot method, meaning that I'm going to go one size bigger on either of these, because when it comes to adjusting engine valves, you want to err on the loose side. Loose valves could make noise. Tight valves can break parts. So, to me, a tight 3 and a loose 2 are pretty close to each other, so I'd rather err on that side. Besides, it's also really hard to hit the value on the head, so sometimes if you go a little bit wider and it's a bit tight, when you come back in with the other feeler gauge, it works well. So what I've done here on the intake valve is I've loosened up the rocker arm as loose as I can make it. And I want to show you guys the motion there. I think you guys can see there's the gap, and that's where we're going to be setting here. But I just want to let you be able to see the range of motion. This is supposed to be set at 2/1000ths. I'm going to use a 3/1000ths feeler gauge. I like to do what I call overshoot it by size. That way I know that my valve isn't going to be too tight. I call it the overshoot method. Loose valves can make noise, but tight valves break parts. So, got my feeler gauge in there. I'm going to turn my adjuster. You'll see the rocker arm tip. See how it's moving down as I turn the screwdriver? I'm going to go until I find the spot where it just grabs that feeler gauge. Right now it's too tight. I can't pull it out. But I back at the screw up just a hair. I'm trying to find that sweet spot where it just has a little bit of drag on it. That's why it's called a feeler gauge, because you can't see it. You have to just pull. That feels good right there. I'm going to hold my screwdriver in position. I'm going to take my lock nut, and that's kind of a good snug 3 right there. I can feel that. And when I can get it back in there with a little bit of work, that tells me I'm probably closer to a loose 2. So that's a good spot to be. I'm happy with that. Same adjustment. Go over to the exhaust side. Done the same exact way. All right, same thing on the exhaust side here. We're going to run a little bit looser though. It's supposed to be 4/1000ths. We're going to use a 5/1000ths feeler gauge again. The overshoot method. Get that feeler gauge right there between the valve tip and the tip of the rocker arm, and go right till I feel that valve just touch the feeler gauge, and then back it off just a hair. Find that spot where it just wants to let go. That feels good about right there. It's got a bit of drag on it. Hold that screwdriver in place and tighten down the lock nut. That feels really good. Bit of drag. Perfect. All right. That means the left side of the engine is adjusted. We're going to turn the crankshaft 180 degrees, and we're going to go over to the right side of the engine and do the same thing. So this concludes the Honda CB350 valve adjustment and cam chain adjustment. Remember, this process has to be done every 1,500 miles along with an oil change and ignition timing. So, this is Brendan with Common Motor. Make sure you subscribe to our newsletter, follow us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, and of course, subscribe to us right here on our YouTube channel. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.